This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And speaking of the union, Jay, this episode is brought to us by a union member, Adam Rogan. He is not joining us, but he gave us an album pick and some notes to go with it, which is nice. I always like when our guests or our selectors do the research for us, and I have less work to do in prepping for the show. I can just focus on listening to the music and, not worrying about Wikipedia and Google and those sorts of things. Want to remind folks, I mentioned at the top show, Dig Me Out, DMO Union, Dig Me Out, union.com. That's where you get to join us to pick records like this one that Adam has selected. And it's an obscure one. How obscure is it? It's not on any streaming services. You can find it on YouTube. Adam provided us with some MP3 rips from a CD he had. So let me ask you, Jay. The pick is Flu 13 in the Foul Key of V, their second album. By chance, had you ever heard of Flu 13?
No. And I even was having trouble believing the band was real. That name just doesn't sound like sounds like a band from a movie or something.
Well, yeah. Everything about the album cover is confusing to me. It looks like, so the album cover is a time-lapse photo of maybe a street.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, it doesn't look like what we're going to talk. It looks like something like a trip hop album cover or something, like something dark and mysterious. And that's not what I was expecting. That's what I was expecting with this record, and it is not what we got. Let's talk a little bit about this band, because honestly, for pretty much everybody listening, this is gonna be the first time you've heard of Flu 13, unless you're a big fan of the band Diffuser.
Okay.
Which had a couple hits. This band, Flu 13, changed their name to Diffuser after this record.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a better name.
Yes. When they so this is the backstory. They were from Long Island, and the original band was Thomas Costanza, Brian Fawcett, Lawrence Sullivan, and Billy Alamagaitis, something like that. Sorry, Billy. So they formed in 94. They do a 7-inch single with Steve Albini, which, that's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
And they signed to a label in New York City called Interplanetary Truckers Union.
I want to see their t-shirts.
So then after the 7-inch, which had 2 songs on the label, they released their first record called Spin Cycle. That was produced by Greg Talenfeld, who produced Pavement, John Spencer Blues Explosion, Beck. So they worked with 2 pretty good names just out of the gate.
Yeah.
And then for this record, after they did some touring, they go into the studio in 96. They call up Jay Robbins, who had been working with some artists like The Promise Ring, Texas Is the Reason, Jets to Brazil, besides his work with, being the lead singer and guitarist of Jawbox and producing those records. And he produces this record in the Foul Key of V. Again, they do some more touring. They actually toured with Cursive for part of this, along with Jawbox, Braid, another Jay Robbins joint.
Yep.
The Promise Ring is mentioned. They do the typical, tours with those bands playing clubs and VFW halls and that kind of thing. And they actually, they got on to CMJ charted them back in 97, but nothing came of it. So then they ended up signing to Hollywood Records, changed their name to Diffuser. And that's when they had a couple of singles. So they had their single Karma was peaked at number 20 on the Billboard mainstream chart as Diffuser, and it was included in the Mission Possible 2 soundtrack. At that point, Sullivan and Alamagaitis left the band, replaced by Peter Shojan and Dan Leo on bass and drums. So basically the rhythm section left. They go tour. They ended up touring with like Simple Plan. And their second album as Diffuser, the first album was released in 2001, Injury Loves Melody. And then the second album, Making the Grade, was released in July of 2003. Songs I Wonder and Get It On were used in the movie Freaky Friday. I believe that's the remake with Lindsay Lohan. And they did some more touring, Hoobastank, All American Rejects, and they got dropped, sadly. And then after getting dropped, they split up, or they split up. Members went on to different things. Haven't really seen anything that they've done since then, but their MySpace page still has stuff on it. If you want to go check that out from the early 2000s.
There's some animated GIFs in the background.
Yeah, basically.
Little wizards.
So they did release a third album in 2008 on Chamberlain Records called Sincerely Wasting Away. I don't know if that was recorded new or if that was during the time from when they, were broken up or whatever. So Costanza has played bass in some other bands. Dan Leo played in some bands, one called Action. But yeah, that's the abbreviated history of Flu 13. There is a bio of the band on the Long Island Music Scene.fandom.com page. They have this did get reviewed in All Music. Jack Rabbit actually reviewed it, so it must have been reviewed for the big takeover, and then that was added to the All Music site.
Maybe All Music might use their reviews.
Yeah. He gave us what he liked and what he didn't like. I will mention those as we're going along in the podcast. There were a couple of comments on this. We'll get to the poll results at the end of the episode, but Ian McIver said, well, it's not my thing. I tried giving it a chance. It sounds exactly like a late 90s album with a sound that has worn out its welcome and other bands have done better before. Decent single. I am not surprised that Ian didn't care for this. Not that you're predictable, Ian, but I give
him credit for giving it a try.
The fact that you even listened to it, hey,
yes,
there you go. That's what it's all about. Because
that's the spirit.
People listen to things and they're like, I would have never have listened to this on my own, but because it was in a poll, I just discovered a cool new record. So let's do this. Let's talk about In the Foul Key of V by Flu 13. Jay, tell me what you liked about this record.
It's a pretty dynamic record. It's working a lot with how do you combine tension, dissonance, and melody. I think in some pretty successful ways. There's aspects of it that feel almost technical as you get into the record. With the first track, the way it kind of starts, it's a little complex. There's a lot going on. But then it kind of switches to these bursts of just pure on aggression, some melodic choruses that, release and kind of open up. There's some other things on here where things just simplify a bit more, and it feels more like, say, like a Rival Schools kind of vibe, was what I was thinking of, where you can kind of hear that kind of beefy, hardcore, angular kind of thing underneath, but it's been kind of sanded off, and you're getting a more, I think, focused sound. There's parts of the record that sound like that. I hear in some of the choruses maybe a Sunny Day Real Estate pop through every now and then, here and there. So there's a lot of cool elements at work here. A lot of I think interesting dynamics between what the drums are doing, which I think in a lot of cases are serving to not only carry the momentum of the song, but also to build tension in the way that they either cut time or stop, or there's a lot of like snare rolls and like builds. There's some really cool fills that kind of, I think, create this sense of tension under a lot of the songs. And then you've got these dueling guitars over top of that are playing with dissonance, melody, harmony. At times they're playing riffs that only make sense when they play them together, which I think is interesting. So I like the use of the two guitars here. They seem kind of equal, and the songs would be almost incomplete without both of them, which I think is good. There's not like a lot of playing the same thing. So, and then, again, with the choruses, there are some solid, I think, choruses in terms of them being memorable, or, paying off like an aggressive verse, or contrasting the verse, or being a little bit hooky. Vocally, there's a decent amount of range here, from gruff whisper to full on scream to singing, and that can kind of almost start and stop on a dime, switching those around. So there's quite a bit going on there as well. So I think songs like My Beijing Hot Rod, A Sweater for the Cold War, Graffiti on a Ceramic Iceberg, and Stale are good examples that I think encapsulate all those points that I think work. What worked for you?
Well, it's funny that this album came up this week, because I don't know why, but I was just jonesing for some like late 90s, early 2000s sort of emo-ish, mathy, post-hardcore rock. So I made a playlist to listen to in the car. It's called Tim Rock. And these are the bands:
Okay.
Shiner, Burning Airlines, No Knife, Cave In. What else is on here? Some Hum, Helmet, Girls Against Boys, Life and Times, Jawbox, At the Drive-In, Mars Volta, Minus the Bear, Hot Rod Circuit, Cursive, Desparcidos, Pretty Girls Make Graves, Hey Mercedes. So this was like, just kind of fit perfectly with all of that stuff. Yeah. I was just jonesing for that, like the dissonant guitar, which, man, this just slots in really well with all those bands. And the fact it was produced by J. Robbins, only is a little icing on the cake there. But this has a lot of those elements. I was hearing things that sounded like At the Drive-In, when you get these like dissonant 2-note leads, like in My Beijing Hot Rod. And they're all over the place. These songs move quick when it comes to change ups. You mentioned the dynamics. There's all sorts of stops and starts, and tempo shifts, and it has a nice energy that it is a post hardcore. And then you mentioned Sunny Day Real Estate, so you get a little bit of that emo-ish sound where when he's I think it's Thomas Costanza is the singer. His vocal can be shouty, like Cedric from At the Drive-In, and then he can kind of do the Jeremy Enoch thing where he can really stretch out his vocal and make it a little a little more whispery. And they do a good job, I think, of, for the most part, keeping these songs pretty tight. This sound can get a little ear fatigue going if you listen to it too much. That's why I put it in a playlist, because I only want to listen to it a couple songs at a time, and I want to kind of be able to skip around and stuff like that if I'm not feeling a particular song at that moment. And for the most part, I mean, these are a lot of quick tracks. There's 2 tracks that are long, which is A Sweater for the Cold War, which is a very long sort of introduction that's not musical. And then Fourth Rail Telegram is 6:16 as well. But other than that, these are like 4.5 minutes and under. A lot of them are in the 2-minute range, 3-minute range, which I greatly appreciate, because I want to fly through these songs. There's a ton of energy, a ton of things happening, and I don't want to get it like, I don't want to get fatigued. So I appreciated that they, for the most part, kept this tight. In terms of songs that worked, you mentioned like My Beijing Hot Rod. I liked some of the last song on the album, the Ghost of the Organ Player. At the what's the end of the song title? It cut off on my MP3.
At the Hockey Coliseum.
At the Hockey Coliseum. Thanks. Adam mentioned it in his notes. He said it has the segue feel of a Failure album.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think that's a cool little element to this band, is that there's a little atmospheric element to some of the stuff that's going on. He mentioned what he liked. He said, I really like their heavy dissonant sound combined with the singer's sometimes melodic vocals. I'm not sure if this is considered emo, post-hardcore, or something else. Their sound may not be for everyone, but I think it rocks. My favorite tracks are My Beijing Hot Rod, Unknown to None, and $2 Polka, which I would include. I mentioned the first 2 ones that I like, but I also like $2 Polka. That kind of that reminded me of like a Criteria type song. It has that like driving halftime feel to part of that song, which I sort of, for some reason, associate with that first Criteria album and the White Octave album, Menergy, that came out around that time as well. And those are like deep cuts in the emo post-hardcore world. But I think that, again, I think this like slots in really nicely with those albums and those bands.
Yeah, it blends all the genres together.
Yeah,
that you mentioned. I think it also, I think, in doing that, to me, typifies 1998.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I heard this, I was like, oh yeah, this is what I remember 98 sounding like. So it's kind of fun in that way. Maybe you were responding to that too. It's like if you took all those bands from that time and mixed them together, they kind of net out to something like this.
Yeah, and you know, again, like 1998, a song like Accessing the Know-How. I mean, that could have been on Relationship of Command or Via or in Casino Out by At the Drive-In. That is such and it's funny because, you know, I don't know these guys ever even heard At the Drive-In. I mean, At the Drive-In hadn't blown up at this point on a national scale. I mean, people knew them, you know, who were into the scene or whatever, but this is a Long Island band and they were from Texas. So maybe they crossed paths out on the touring circuit. There is an aspect of the guitar playing that is really cool in the same way that Omar plays guitar. There's a lot of weird notes that I don't know what the heck he's playing. Yeah. And it's very interesting. But again, like that song, I don't think there is a moment in that song that isn't dissonant. There's so many bends and dissonant notes in that song. It's a lot. And it's only 3.5 minutes, which sort of leads me into what didn't work. This album's too dissonant, even for me. And I love dissonance, but man, I needed I think that's why I like No Knife a lot, especially the Fire in the City Automatons and Riot for Romance, those two albums. They do the dissonant thing, but then they find really catchy spots. A song like I just mentioned the playlist, going back and listening to the Fire in the City of Automatons album by No Knife. There's a song like Mission Control, which is got these dissonant weird parts, but then draws it back for the verses, and it keeps the verses very slim, very tight, and you can kind of rest until the chorus when it, you know, gets big again. I just needed some breaths on this album. How about you?
I'm with you. I would even be more specific and say the beginning of the first half of the record, to me, balances those things fairly well. I feel like through track 5, I'm getting a good balance of dissonance and harmony and things coming together and falling apart, and that tension is working. I think it starts to get like the scales tip in the dissonant side after track 6. So track 6, Sadder Than Severe, is a little bit of an experimental, like almost like a sketch of a song. And then to me, this record really takes a turn to start to be less song oriented and more like riffs, aggression, dissonance, noise. Like it's like a half shade off of where we were. It's not like a total departure, but it's just enough to where by the time I get to the end of the record, I'm just sort of lost in it. Like I'm not grabbing, there's not enough moments to grab onto. I felt like on my passive listens, that second half of the record, I was just fading. Like it was just really hard for me to grab on anything. I think when I was, taking notes and actively listen, I could pull out little parts I liked, but a lot of it just kind of felt like endless riffs. Like, oh, that's a cool riff, but then there's another riff, and then we go to another riff, and then there's this part, and there's just, it's just almost just all dynamics and not enough song craft on the second half. That's my my interpretation of what I was hearing and how I was reacting to it. And I think also just like hearing how the band could balance it on the first half of the record, and then starting to depart that, then I was always comparing it to those songs, to think like, oh, that could be like this, but they didn't quite go there. Or that chorus could be a lot hookier than it is, but they're, kind of screaming or not even really delivering a chorus.
Right.
So I would kind of break it down like that.
Yeah. I don't love the sequencing of this record. And actually Adam brought that up. He doesn't like the sequencing. He said, Unknown to None would be a great closing song. The ghost of the organ player at the hockey Coliseum sounds like a failure segue and should be placed in the middle of the album somewhere.
Yeah, it's weird at the end.
A sweater for the Cold War should be trimmed and placed later in the album. I definitely think it should be trimmed. And a song like Jerome Does a Dance in Hi-Fidelity, that's so dissonant. It's only 240, but it's an instrumental.
Yep.
And Paige Hamilton would be like, you're doing a little too much dissonance there, buddy. Like, calm it down. That song to me almost should be like a minute. Like you fade in, have this crazy thing, and then fade out, and just make it this like 1 minute long segue song or something like that. To pair with the ghost of the organ player, because as a 2 minute and 40-second song, it's just so overwhelming. The amount of I get it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I like that stuff. I just need it balanced. And
it loses its effect when you've done a theme. By the time you've heard it, 1,000 times on the record, you're like, okay, we've spent any novelty that has now been worn out. I think an instrumental, I don't feel it's a great choice for this band. I just don't. It indulges in all of those things we just talked about too much, because there doesn't need to be a song or a vocal. It's just kind of like jamming on those bits and parts. And to me, there's some cool ideas in there, but I don't think it serves this album and this band very well. It's the kind of thing I would trim out and just try to clean it up. And if you want to have an 8-minute song, I think A Sweater for the Cold War is a better example of, like, if you're going to go all in on a big 8-minute song, I think it at least stays interesting through the whole thing. I would trim some of the other fat, though, the instrumentals, and change sequencing. And
the way that builds, it feels more like a closer to me. And Unknown to None.
Agree.
So that's part of my sequencing issue. Putting it as a third track is a very bold choice. I'll just say that. No shit. Because you're like, we gave you these two very dynamic, interesting songs, and now we're gonna slow it down a lot.
Yeah.
So I probably that's really my issue. I think this album flows better if you just completely rearrange, a lot of the tracks. Move A Sweater for the Cold War to the end, move the ghost of the organ player to the middle. You could probably just cut Jerome Does a Dance in Hi-Fidelity. I make Sadder Than Severe a hidden track after. I don't know that it adds anything. It doesn't. You mentioned about being kind of experimental, but like, I think if you're going to do something really bizarre with an acoustic guitar, you almost want to go like in a poppy direction, like a totally unexpected direction.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to write Time of My Life by Green Day here, but just like, you know what I mean? It just needs to be, just give me some like melody to chew on.
Yeah. I would say it sounds more like a sketch to me. Like it sounds like one of their songs.
Yes.
It just sounds like they started writing it and then gave up.
Yes.
We're like, I don't know. This is an idea. I don't know where to take it. Let's just put this on the record.
Yeah, because so much of what they're doing is really interesting. And I said before, it fits in so perfectly with a lot of stuff I've been listening to and that era, that it would be easy to say to someone, oh, you're really into, Mineral and Jawbox and that stuff. You should check out this Flu 13 band, even though the name is not great. The music would definitely fit in with that. But good luck finding it because it's not on streaming. So the best you're going to do is finding it on YouTube, which is not a great rip, I don't think. So you'll have to ask Adam, who provided us with the MP3s for this. All that said, even though this sounds like 1988, or excuse me, 1998, 97, 98, this is not a radio album.
No. And none of the bands that you mentioned for your playlist are radio albums, but are bands, but they all toured successfully. They had some of them sustained careers for a long time.
Yeah.
I think this, I don't know what the band sounded like after this. I'm guessing based on who you told me they were touring with and stuff, it takes a little bit of a turn towards something maybe more melodic, but
yeah, they definitely, I think it's described as heading in a more like Foo Fighters direction, like which Foo Fighters in, 98 to 2000, that's Color and the Shape and There's Nothing Left to Lose in those albums. So I mean, it's still rock, but it's not quite as sawed off, or sanded down as it is now. It still had a little bit of an edge back then. So also
the height of this band is, finding a hardcore niche audience and, making a couple records, maybe touring for a while with it.
Yeah. Totally would have expected to see this band on the touring circuit when we were like seeing shows at Little Brothers.
Yeah. Sure.
Opening for Cursive, opening for At the Drive-In, opening for whoever. That would have totally made sense.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely that sound. Let's get into overall rate. Is it a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single? Where do you land?
I'm landing at an EP. I'm going to take tracks 1 through 5. So basically the first side of the record, and I'll throw in Romeo-Core from the second side. It's got a little bit of that Rival Schools kind of vibe to it. And that's my EP. I think with that, I get everything the band does. I think everything after that becomes a bit redundant. Like I've kind of already heard it. And that can be fine. Like not every song has to reinvent itself, but they need to be great songs. And I think the rest of the stuff, there's some cool ideas, there's some cool riffs. They're just not as compelling as songs as the ones I mentioned. Where did you land?
Same. I like the first 5. I would trim a Sweater for the Cold War a little bit. I would add Romeo-Core and $2 Polka. So that gives me 7 songs at about like 30 something minutes. So I think that's a really solid EP from this band. And I think any of the bands that I mentioned, if you're into them, you will definitely dig this band. There's a lot of stuff happening that sounds familiar, but also they're doing their own thing, which is nice to hear. Some of these, riffs and leads and dynamics and things that they were doing are new, and in the sense that I had not heard, that particular riff before. So it's always nice to find something that's a familiar sound, but like a slightly new take on it. It's not reinventing the wheel; it's just giving you another spoke, if that's possible. Our patrons. What did you want to say?
I was just going to say, and I think the last note on it was, it sounds great. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a J. Robbins produced record. So even though it's dissonant, it's benefiting from, really well-engineered, clean production.
Yep. Absolutely. Another one to thank Jay for. I wonder if he remembers this, because this is so obscure. I kind of want to like post it on Facebook and be like, hey, do you remember working on this record, Jay? I'm sure you were busy, so you might have forgotten. Our patrons over at Patreon, they went 50% worthy album, 25% better EP, 25% decent single. So we're the album from our patrons. I guess the dissonance won in their mind, which is cool. That's it's not far off in terms of a vote here and there can swing it to a split between worthy album and better EP. But
yeah, it's familiar. I think it's familiar territory for a lot of different listening tastes from the 90s. Like if you're in the 90s rock, especially late 90s rock, this band is probably touching on an aspect of it that you liked.
Absolutely.
Unless you're Ian.
Yes, of course. Yeah, if this isn't your thing, it's not going to make sense to you now if it didn't then.
Yeah. Yep.
That's just the reality on it. But if it was, boom, roasted. No, boom, you're going to like this. Well, we need to thank Adam.
Yeah.
For suggesting this record, digging out this is truly a dig me out.
Right.
A well dug from well beneath the earth. He was there with a little brush dusting off the remnants. And Jay, do you want to know something crazy that I learned?
What's that?
You know, when we talk about dinosaur bones, people
when
digging them up.
You and I,
when we yes, when the royal we, all of us.
Oh, okay.
You know, bones disintegrate.
Yeah.
So when we dig up dinosaur bones, they're not actually the bones. It's what's filled in the spot where they disintegrated. I didn't realize that until I was 49 years old.
Well, they're fossilized, so they're changed what they are.
Yeah, they're not the bones. Like the bone isn't.
They become something else.
What do they become, Jay?
Well, they're still kind of what they were, but
are they? Or is this a ship of Theseus situation here?
A what?
A ship of Theseus? Do you know what the ship of Theseus was?
No.
I only know this because of WandaVision. So the theory is, and you can apply. I actually had a conversation about this last weekend, applying it to bands.
Okay.
The ship of Theseus is like, so you have a wooden ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you start to replace pieces as the wood rots.
Right.
And eventually you replace every single piece of wood on that ship. Is it still the same ship you started with? Because not a single piece exists. I was mentioning that because we were talking about bands that don't have any original members in them, but are still touring because like the third guitar player is left from when they, from 20 years into the band. Is that really still the band if there's not a single original member left?
Yeah, I struggle with that.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah, that guy played bongos on the fourth album and he's the only guy left from the line, any lineup. Everybody's just a hired gun at this point, just playing. Basically, it's a tribute band with one guy who knows the songs really well. Or may have written a few.
I think Foreigners basically at that point.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of groups, like a lot of like oldies groups. Like I think the Temptations are still touring, but there's like nobody from the Temptations still in the band.
Yeah.
It's like guys who replaced guys in the 80s are now the guys who have been in the band for 40 years.
Oh God. Oh.
It's like, wait a minute, you're the Temptations. How is there a 25-year-old guy in the Temptations? That's not possible. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen with all of our musical acts.
I know.
Like eventually, Alice in Chains will be down to like they'll bring back Mike Starr or something, and
I think he's dead.
Oh, is he dead? I'm sorry about that. They'll bring him Mike Starr's son.
There you go.
Like, why isn't Jason Bonham start Led Zeppelin? Like, why not?
Well, yeah, he's got to wait for Sure, the rust from the die. That maybe he can.
True, but not
Probably
everybody
just-
Foreigner is
Actually,
dead.
I don't think Robert Plant would probably care. I think Jimmy Page is the only one that would care.
What has Jimmy Page done? I know we're way off topic here, but I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, he had an
it is
insane
weird.
run.
Yeah, it is weird. He's been so quiet that he hasn't been inspired to do something. He stayed pretty active up
Even in
until
the-
that Black Rose thing. That was kind of the last thing he did, right?
Yeah, like because in the 80s he did stuff. He had his solo albums. He was with, what was the band called, The Firm,
Yeah.
that he played in. Then they got back together and did the Plant Page tour. They did a whole record. Then
He
you
did the
mentioned the
Coverdale
Black Rose
Page thing.
Yeah, Coverdale Page. And then like once the 2000s hit, he was just like, I'm gone. I'm done.
Yeah,
Like,
he
don't
just
you-
focused on like Led Zeppelin remixes and remasters.
I guess, but doesn't he? I mean, does he ever pick up the guitar anymore? Like, I'm just curious. Like, is this like a Prince situation? Like, when he passes away, there's going to be like a million songs that we didn't know
I don't
about.
know. I know. I mean, they spent a lot of time trying to do the reunion. Remember when they were auditioning other singers? This would have been like 2007, 8.
Right.
They did that celebration concert, and then they tried to get Robert Plant to do a tour, and he wouldn't do it. So then they were gonna find another singer.
Who are you going to find? Seriously.
Apparently, they auditioned Steven Tyler and
Oh my God.
what's his name from the Mayfield Four
Oh, yeah. The guy,
and Alter Bridge
Miles Kennedy.
and Miles Kennedy.
Is that the guy who also
Yep.
sings with like Slash?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
There were a couple other big names. Sammy Hagar, I think, at one point was
Oh
either
my
asked
God.
or auditioned.
at that point, just have like 10 people and just rotate singers by song.
Right.
Like-
Just do it like a trick. Like, yeah, do like the songs with Led Zeppelin and then do a tour and just have like, yeah, a bunch of singers come out and sing.
I mean, at this point, Jimmy Page should just join Greta Van Fleet and be like, "Hey guys,
They
I
must
got
have
a
been
few million riffs I haven't used. Do you want to try them out?" I'm just collecting them on tapes.
I'm guessing they must have been. I'd have to look at the timeline, but I'm wondering if they were inspired by Queen. Now they got another run out of Adam Lambert being in the band.
Well, and they had Paul Rogers too, right?
He was thinking he was going to do that. Yeah, Paul Rogers too. Maybe they were thinking they were going to do something like that.
I bet they. Yeah, I don't even know that John Paul Jones cares. That I don't know what he does also, other than he just did that. Not just, but he did that thing with Josh Homme and 20 or 15 years ago, the Them Crooked Vultures album. Anyway, well, way off topic. Hope you all enjoyed our tangents here. It's football season, so this is how I avoid talking about the Bills. In there.
That was rough, man.
I'll say this. I said like 2 years ago that I don't think Josh Allen is a big game quarterback. I think he folds and he presses. I think what he starts out with a plan and then he starts pressing when things don't go well.
Mhm.
And the best that I can hope for him is that as he matures, he has sort of an Elway end to his career and like finally gets it figured out so that we can make an actual championship run. But I don't know. There's just something missing with him because there's no reason to throw 3 interceptions in that game. That was just awful.
Or a Roethlisberger type thing where it's just like there's so much talent around him that he just runs around and check bombs and gets passing interference penalties and
right.
It's just like creates chaos and stuff happens and things fall into place. But there's enough talent around him that it all works out.
I mean, Jesus Christ, the Bengals or the Ravens won the Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer. You telling me? But they had but it was because of their defense.
Yeah.
So, and this defense is good. I mean, it's not a bad defense. They have a really strong front line, but not having Von Miller in is it's everything's been a little softer since he went out. They were, I don't know. It's why am I surprised? This is the last 40 years.
Well, make some room. The Browns will take their spot.
That's my backup. I do root for the Browns, since I've lived in Ohio longer than I've lived in New York at this point. So
we need somebody to take a step back. If the Browns are going to move forward, somebody's got to get out of the way.
Well, I think it's the Bengals. I think that offensive line is suspect, and I don't think that they've got. I don't think they got it in them. I think they willed
we'll
themselves.
See, but the Browns are definitely their kryptonite. I don't.
Yeah, what is it? 9 out of 11 games they've beaten them now.
Yeah, I don't remember in the last 20 years of Browns history being this dominant over a single team. It's kind of crazy.
Wild.
It's like how we felt against the Steelers, like just getting walloped and embarrassed every year, twice a year.
And now you got the Steelers this week, right?
Yeah, Monday night. Yep.
Well, that's the end of football talk with Jay and Tim. Let's wrap this up and remind you.
You hung up this long.
Yeah. They remind you that you can go to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com to join the union. You can watch the video of this episode at the Patreon. It's also where you vote in the polls, like for this episode. It's also where you vote in the polls for our monthly tournaments, where albums suggested at digmeoutpodcast.com make their way into our monthly polls, where like a 2 dozen or so. I don't know. What is it? 9 and 9 is 18.
Nice. You got it.
I didn't even have to use my fingers. 18 albums, 2 weeks of voting, and that pairs down to a single 4 album final and a single 4 album final. That doesn't make sense. 4 albums and then 1. So we go to 18, 4, 1. That's it. You can vote at Patreon. You can suggest at digmeoutpodcast.com. You can also utilize the website to sign up for the box newsletter, which you can read at Patreon. Every week, new releases of 80s, 90s, and aughts music, movies, books, TV shows, and 2 reviews of new releases. And then finally, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave some positive feedback for the show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.